bass pedals. There's Brian.
To be a pop star, I enjoy it.
What happens is that the lifestyle starts to choose you. That's the problem.
It's Brian with the slide.
He's not the kind of person that you take to because he's so cynical. He's got no feelings for anybody.
He was doing so many stupid things all the time.
Say hi to Brian. Brian is one of the writers of most of the things, right?
No, I'm not actually. Well, I'm not really a writer.
Mick and Keith are wonderful songwriters. I mean, they're just great.
He was studying that Mick and Keith were writing shit.
No matter what anyone says, rock on.
Keith wrote The Basics of Satisfaction, and then it became this classic fucking track, you know.
I'm not really sort of satisfied, either artistically or personally.
Because he was drinking from the morning to the last minute in the night.
The future as a Rolling Stone is very uncertain.
I think he would have liked to have been like Mick, but then no one's like Mick. He has this charisma about him. He has this amazing energy.
Dear Melinda, Mick is the head of the group. At one time I was, but Mick took over. Don't ask me why.
I understand Brian because I think he was a lost person.
I think the drugs destroyed his already failing discipline, and you can't be an artist without discipline.
I think he liked drinking, I think he liked drugs, but they weren't very good for him.
He probably knew that this could only lead ultimately to self-destruction.
And also became more self-destructive. Now, like, I'm one to talk about that, right? But I'm still here.
He was not very nice, and he upset people very easily. He wasn't very pleasant, I mean.
Brian took too many drugs of the wrong kind, and he wasn't functioning as a musician. It was a very, very difficult decision to make.
So Mick and I had to go down and sort of tell Brian virtually, like, hey, cock, you're fired.
A child is a thing to be loved. A child is the manifestations of both parents, and both parents see themselves in the child. The child is part of them. He is their flesh and blood. And for a good many years, he is a reflection of their personality. So when he grows up, one day he's going to assert his own personality, which might very well differ from the personalities and outlooks of his parents. Immediately his parents feel very upset, that they don't see themselves in him anymore. And when these parents don't see themselves in him, they feel they've lost him. But really, he's become a human being in his own right.
Throughout his life, Brian grappled with a strained connection with his parents who disapproved of his chosen lifestyle. Rather than embracing his decision to pursue a unique path, they desired for Brian to follow in his father's footsteps and secure a conventional job.
Up to a certain point, Brian was a perfectly normal, conventional boy who was well-behaved and was well-liked. Liked, I suppose, because he was well-behaved. He did his studies, and he was quite a model schoolboy. And then there came this peculiar change in his early teens. At the time, I suppose, he began to become a man, where he began to get some resentment of authority. It was a rebellion against parental authority, and it was certainly a rebellion against school authority. He often used to say, why should he do something he was told just because the person who was telling him was older?
Brian had immense opposition from his father. His dad didn't like him trying to be a musician. So they all just thought, get a proper job, the same old thing.
Brian, facing frustration due to his parents' disapproval, sought solace in Val's family, immersing himself in playing blues music. Val, possessing both style and keenness, captured Brian's admiration. and a mutual affection blossomed between them. They seemed unmistakably destined for each other. However, their story took a turn when Valerie became pregnant. Initially thrilled about the prospect of building a life together in London, reality struck when it became apparent that this plan was not feasible. Brian did propose marriage, but Valerie's mother vehemently opposed the idea. In those times, parental authority held significant sway, leading to Val and Brian's child being sent to a nursing home and ultimately given up for adoption.
All the time, his fanaticism for jazz music was coming to the fore. It was a great disappointment to us and a source of considerable anxiety when he became so wrapped up in his love of jazz music that in spite of everything we could do or say, he went off and did it.
On the 22nd of December 1960, at the age of 17, Brian experienced a profound upheaval when he was expelled from his family home, an action later described by his father as the most drastic measure taken.
Still you beg me to celebrate, but my friend, that will never fade. Better move on.
And there was Brian's suitcase in the driveway. It was a really sad night. He had asked me to help him to get his clothes and stuff out. But lucky I got, as I said, my sister at that particular time had a spare room. He had a great time at my sister's.
With no familial support, Brian sought refuge with Pat and her sister Betty, finding care and shelter under their parents' wing. This marked the onset of a recurring pattern in Brian's life, wherein he would integrate himself into other families, leading to pregnancies with their daughters, only to eventually depart. This cycle repeated itself at least 5 times. Despite their expectations at the young age of 19, Brian established the Rolling Stones, a groundbreaking musical venture that defied norms and captivated audiences.
Let's introduce you stone by stone to the Rolling Stones.
Come on, this is me, my baby party, come on. I can't get started, come on.
Hello, I'm Mick Jagger. Charlie what? Who? Charlie what? Brian Jones. Keith Richard. Bill Wyman.
On the question of hair, boys, you're pretty long in the hair. What's the point of long hair these days? I believe it's going out in England and it's going out in Australia.
Yeah, but we still like it.
You thought of anything different, like plaiting your hair or anything like this?
Funny man. We've got a comedian here, I see.
I believe some of the Eastern States groups have even suggested that you're effeminate. What have you got to say about this?
Well, darling. Well, we're not, you know.
Some stupid guy trying to reach another number.
Brian Jones, the founding member of the Rolling Stones, was a multi-talented musician and a pivotal figure in the 1960s rock and roll scene. However, the assessment of his impact and contribution to the band and the music industry as a whole has been a subject of debate among fans and critics alike. He's often associated with a haze of drug-fueled chaos and eventual tragedy. Beyond the sensational headlines and rock and roll extravagance lies a captivating and multifaceted individual. Is Brian Jones underrated or overrated? Let's delve into his musical journey and examine the arguments on both sides of this intriguing question. The underrated perspective. Supporters of the underrated view emphasize Jones's vital role in shaping the Rolling Stones' early sound.
He was brilliant. He was a brilliant musician. He shocked everybody with the quality of his playing. We all dedicated ourselves to the band, and Brian more so than anybody else because it was his band in the beginning.
Jones had a musical vision that extended far beyond the blues rock boundaries that the Stones later embraced. He was like a musical magpie, incorporating Eastern influences, jazz improvisation, and even classical strings into the band's early repertoire.
The toughest Chicago music Elmore James, Robert Johnson, Muddy Waters.
Oh, time's coming, you're gonna be a rolling stone. You're gonna be a rolling stone.
And so that atonal, bluesy, harmonic structure of all the Stones, so that came from Brian. And then the edginess of the sound, that was Brian.
Well, I feel, yes, I feel.
It certainly is true that for loads and loads of American teenagers, they didn't really know about the blues before the Stones. That was a really key moment in Brian's trajectory, introducing that stuff to Americans.
We wanted to do a blues, and everybody said, don't do it, because you'll destroy your career. No one's ever done a blues record for a single in England. Well, when we did Little Red Rooster, they said, you're going to kill yourself. It came out on the Friday, and on the Monday it was number one. And it's Brian with the slide.
Tracks such as Paint It Black and Ruby Tuesday distinctly carry his creative touch, blending sitar drones, mellotron washes, and his haunting blues harp.
Bass pedals. There's Brian.
I see a line of cars I see a red door and I want it painted black.
His musical prowess was diverse, showcasing his skills on guitar, sitar, piano, and harmonica.
He was doing all that stuff without asking even. He'd pick up a flute or just anything that was handy and just create something out of it which wasn't there originally, and it embellished the song so much that it became the catch.
While the sun is bright, or in the darkest night, no one knows.
Can you hear him?
She comes and goes.
He just finds a flute, and he finds a little thing he can play on it.
Or in the darkest night, no one knows.
Jones wasn't merely a rhythm guitarist, he was a sonic architect, crafting intricate soundscapes that pushed the limits of rock and roll.
I only saw him, and heard him. The sound was what I was connecting to, and it was the harmonica and the slide guitar. First time I'd ever heard that kind of music or felt that kind of feeling, it was just amazing. Yeah, a whole new feeling came over me that I'd never felt before. Seeing them get more and more popular and more people coming to see them, it was very exciting.
How do you feel when you get all these girls screaming and shouting?
It's great. Girls screaming at a concert and not for somebody else, It's the same, just a measure of success, but it is great anyway. Obviously, you feel a personal pride.
We were in a bloody tornado all the time. The band in 1963 played over 300 gigs. When you come on stage, the whole crowd just pour forward.
In the bygone era, Brian Jones stood shoulder to shoulder with the iconic Mick Jagger, radiating an unparalleled popularity that rivaled the very essence of the early Stones. He embodied the heart and soul of the band, a luminary whose brilliance outshone all. Astonishingly, in the contemporary landscape, the once dazzling star that was Brian Jones has faded into the shadows of obscurity, his name lost in the echoes of time. The resonant chord he struck with legions of fans now remains a silent testament to an era when Brian, not Mick, answered to the adoring calls of the faithful.
Everything is wrong. Me and my baby party all day long. I'm walking with
Jones's innovative approach set the Rolling Stones apart as pioneers in the genre, earning him acclaim for his contributions. Jones's influence extended beyond music. During the band's formative years, he served as the de facto leader, shaping their image. His unique fashion sense and charismatic stage presence not only defined the rock star archetype, but also paved the way for future musicians to embrace individuality and self-expression.
In the early days, who got all the fan mail? Brian. The secretaries told me, well, we get about 100 letters, about 60 of them are for Brian, about 25 are for Mick, there's about 10 for Charlie and Keith. And
we're very excited because we didn't expect this sort of reception. We didn't know much about Australia, how big we were or how small we were. And we're very knocked out. I mean, the girls, listen to that, they're wild, we're knocked out, really are.
Are you used to this kind of reception then?
Yeah, we're used to it, but we're not, we weren't expecting Australia because we didn't think we were very well known.
Well, apparently you're rather well known. First of all, let's deal with some of the numbers. How did all this start?
Well, we just met each other in jazz clubs in London about 2 years ago.
As the turbulent rivalry between Brian and Mick for the coveted leadership of the Stones intensified, Mick's innate charisma as a frontman became an insurmountable force. Brian, grappling with his own insecurities, unwittingly fueled this power struggle. A palpable tension emerged, gradually evolving into a consuming force that began to overshadow Brian's every thought. Brian, the enigmatic instrumentalist and creative genius, grappled with insecurities that played into the growing competition. Mick's natural aptitude for fronting the band made him an unstoppable force, overshadowing Brian's role as the initial focal point of the Stones. A visible tension began to weave its way into the fabric of the band. As the struggle for leadership intensified, the rift between Brian and Mick became a palpable energy, a seismic force that began to shape the band's trajectory.
I feel alright, children.
I think they were a little bit lost until Andrew came along, and then Andrew kind of laid down the law and said what he wanted to do, which was all very well, and I thought that was a good idea to have a manager, but I don't think Brian realised that he would be handing everything over to him.
The struggle for dominance played out not only on stage, but also behind closed doors, where creative decisions and the direction of the band were fiercely contested.
See, the trouble was, by 1963, when Mick and Keith were writing songs and all that, Andrew was trying to promote Keith and kind of dismiss Brian, get Brian out of the way. And so what he did was he stopped me, Charlie and Brian from doing any interviews with any of the newspapers, any interviews at all, and gave them all to Mick and Keith.
They were all a little weary of Brian, because he could be kind of moody. But I think they put that on him because he was supposed to be the leader and he was no longer the leader.
Dear Melinda, Mick is the head of the group. At one time I was, but Mick took over. Don't ask me why.
I understand Brian because I think he was a lost person.
Whenever he put satisfaction, he was going mad. He was telling that Mick and Keith were writing shit and he couldn't stand the music they were doing. He said, it's not the music I wanted to do. I made a group to do some blues and rock and roll and he said, look at this, it's vulgar, awful, it's out of tune, it's nothing.
He was playing guitar at home, but he was not really composing because I think he was not sure of himself. He wasn't sure that he was right. He wasn't sure that what he was doing was good. And he had nobody around to tell him to go on, to do it. I think he was not so happy. I think he was sort of sad. And I think also that when he was crying at night and that all those things were, only symptoms, he was worried of so many people, looking at him. And, Brian was much more happy when he was alone.
Brian was really nervous that night because he's walking in on a Beatles session. And I kind of thought he'd bring a guitar, but no, he brought his saxophone. He was nervous to the point of sort of shaking a little bit. And he was like a ropey sax player. So I thought, aha, we've got just the tune. It was very nice. Brian was a very nice guy. I remember sort of laughing a lot with him, giggling a lot.
I thought it was really funny. I never listened to one album of the Rolling Stones in Brian's place. Never. Brian was completely fan of the Beatles. I mean, all day long we were listening to the Beatles or the Righteous Brothers, but never, never, never the Rolling Stones. The only person of the group who came to visit him was Bill. I never, never, never see Mick or Keith coming to visit him. Never, never, never.
You mentioned that he did something with Jimi Hendrix.
Yes.
Some playing.
Yeah. No one knows that. What do I say? I got Brian trying to write a song with that guy, Michael Aldred, of Ready, Steady, Go. But they're unique things that I've just happened to got, but he never had the courage to record it.
Oh, fucking hell, turn it off.
So far away, like an angel, drifting through the paths of stars alone. I'd read over likes and dislikes, her story of success.
He never played me a song he'd written, so it's quite hard to know really if he wanted to do songs with us he'd written. I think he did, but he was very shy and all that, and I think he found it rather hard to lay it down to us, that this was a song and it went like this. And we probably sort of didn't even think, because he didn't do it, we didn't try and bring it out of him probably, which is, I suppose, a bit insensitive of us.
Proponents of the underrated argument also highlight Jones's songwriting prowess, underscoring his creative contributions to early hits. Tracks like Under My Thumb and Child of the Moon evolved into sonic landscapes of his struggle, raw and brutally honest. Yet, even amid the darkness, glimmers of brilliance persisted. His mastery of instruments, his unorthodox arrangements, continued to push the boundaries of rock. Despite Mick Jagger and Keith Richards often taking the spotlight, Jones proved himself as a significant songwriter in his own right. So the next time you hear Paint It Black, Ruby Tuesday, or Child of the Moon, take a moment to appreciate the man behind the music.
Under my thumb, the girl who...
To be a pop star, I enjoy it, with reservations, but I'm not really sort of satisfied, either artistically or personally.
You know, when I think about it, Brian, when we were slogging away with no recognition, just doing what we're doing, you know, and quite enjoying it, but with no great ambitions or anything, he was a great guy.
Let's face it, the future as a Rolling Stone is very uncertain.
Brian Jones, the underrated architect of sound, whose legacy deserves to be bathed in the full, vibrant spectrum of his artistic brilliance.
No matter what anyone says, rock on.
The overrated perspective. Conversely, critics who label Jones as overrated point to his turbulent personal life and eventual departure from the Rolling Stones.
You think you're in control of this wonderful, enjoyable lifestyle, and there's a sort of moment where you are, but then what happens is that the lifestyle starts to choose you. That's the problem.
The phone rings and it's Brian, and he said, "I'm not gonna come tomorrow." And I said, huh? Why? And he said, "Because they're so mean to me." And I said, "Who's so mean to you?" And he said, "Mick and Keith. They're making my life hell." Naively, I said, "Well, what would the Rolling Stones be without you?"
He was just gone. Well, he wouldn't turn up half the time. When he did turn up, he was not in any condition to do anything, to baby him. No, it was very sad.
Perhaps the acclaim surrounding Brian Jones has been somewhat exaggerated, clouding the true perception of his role and accomplishments.
Do you feel bitter at all, Pam?
Not actually bitter. I feel quite sorry for Brian in a way, because the kind of person he is, he can never be happy, could never have true friends. The only friend that he has probably like him because of what he is. I think if he was turned out onto the streets, nobody would want to know Brian. He's not the kind of person that you take to, because he's so cynical. He's got no feelings for anybody. He just uses people for his own good, and when he's finished, well, he throws them aside. So I just feel sorry for him.
He was doing so many stupid things all the time. And we didn't sleep for days and days and days. And once a week we were sleeping one night, and then again and again and again clubs and everything, you know.
Initially, while Jones undeniably possessed musical talent, his contributions to songwriting for the Stones were modest. The essence of the band thrived in the Jagger-Richards collaboration, producing iconic riffs and anthemic lyrics, a psychedelic symphony far removed from the bluesy thunder craved by Mick. His lyrics, fragments of poetry reflecting his inner turmoil, were penned, yet they lacked the visceral punch, the streetwise swagger effortlessly wielded by Jagger.
Say hi to Brian. Brian is one of the writers of most of the things, right?
No, I'm not actually. Well, I'm not really a writer. We do write a lot of stuff together. It comes out under the Nankerfeld pseudonym, but Mick and Keith write more than any of us.
Brian tormented himself because he couldn't write songs like Mick and Keith, whose compositions had moved the band onto a whole new level. Brian Jones, the elusive architect behind the Rolling Stones, locked in a fierce battle with Mick Jagger, the charismatic frontman whose voice was a loaded weapon ready to fire. The battleground? Not just the stage, but the sacred realm of songcraft.
Writing the songs that you write, do you sometimes think that you have a special inspiration for the way that you...
Well, you better ask about writing songs. You know, better address those questions to Mick and Keith, because they'll tell you more about it.
I'm talking to Keith and to Mick.
Oh, yeah.
These are the two that are supposed to be all the writing talent. You fellas get together and do most of the writing, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, a lot of it. You know, some of it.
Do you have a particular inspiration for some of your songs that seem to springboard them out?
Well, I don't know. Ask Keith. I don't really think so. No, it just happened.
Mick ruled the roost as far as what they were going to play and the fact that he could write music and Brian couldn't. I think there may have been a little jealousy there. The fact that Mick and Keith were so close.
Jagger, with his magnetic growl and a devil-may-care demeanor, was a born showman. He wrote with an inkwell brimming with sweat and desire, spewing anthems of rebellion and youthful unrest that struck a chord with a generation hungry for change. Jumpin' Jack Flash and Satisfaction, I Can't Get No, were Jagger's sonic grenades, exploding with raw energy, leaving Brian's introspective verses overshadowed like wildflowers crushed beneath the boots of a rock god. The tension simmered beneath the surface.
Strange thing was, the very same night, Keith wrote the basics of Satisfaction. He says in Clearwater, Florida, at night time he woke up with that, with the idea of satisfaction. Can't get no satisfaction. And when he woke up in the morning and listened to it and all that, him and Mick thought it was a pretty okay song for an album. And then it became this classic fucking track, They're going da 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 da, and I'm going doom doom da 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 da.
Mick and Keith are wonderful songwriters. I mean, they're just great, extraordinary. I mean, I couldn't admire them more. They tended to write more about sex. So from 64, 84, like for 20 years, they were just turning them out. I mean, they're classic rock and roll songs. I'd rate it as extraordinary.
Brian, plagued by insecurity and sensitivity, felt his creative voice drowned by the Jagger juggernaut. His bandmates gravitated toward Mick's songwriting prowess, their admiration translating into musical choices that marginalized him.
I guess he was a little jealous of Mick because he had all the fame sort of thing.
As the Stones ascended to unprecedented heights of fame, the rivalry between Brian and Mick reached its zenith. The charismatic allure of Jagger became synonymous with the band, leaving Brian marginalized and grappling with his diminishing influence.
I think he would have liked to have been like Mick, but then no one's like Mick. He has this charisma about him, he has this amazing energy.
Jones's diverse musical vision, though intriguing, occasionally clashed with the band's emerging blues rock direction. His affinity for Eastern influences and instrumentation, while enhancing some early tracks, might have ultimately diverted the band's focus and commercial appeal.
They had two different ideas of what they wanted to do. Brian loved Howlin' Wolf and he wanted to stay as a blue group. Andrew wanted them to be pop. I think Andrew and Brian just didn't hit it off, and I think they just got into loggerhead. Pop sold, and obviously Andrew wanted to make money.
Jones's reputation as a proficient multi-instrumentalist is sometimes overstated. Although he played various instruments, his mastery of many was limited. His guitar work, often overshadowed by Richards's distinctive brilliance, didn't define the Stones' sound. His sitar and mellotron contributions, while unique, were more like embellishments than fundamental elements of their music.
And anyway, I'm thinking, what the fuck do we do with 4 Rolling Stones if we really are looking at 5 Rolling Stones? And so then he stopped, he listened, and he stopped crying. And he said, it's just been a hard day. And also, you don't know how much I think he was drinking a lot. I convinced him to come the next day. there was something kind of childlike about him, because then he had dressed kind of like a wizard. Then when they got on stage at 2 in the morning, he was, I would say he was drunk, because he looked it. And he could play the maracas, and he could play the slide. He could hardly play the guitar in the regular way. He looked dreadful, really. His big bags under his eyes. I mean, really bags under his eyes for a guy of 26.
He was also having, breakdown very often. He was crying at night. He was having, he was really, he wanted to have his things, he wanted to go to a clinic to be.
I think he liked drinking. I think he liked drugs, but they weren't very good for him. I don't think they're good for anyone, but he wasn't strong enough mentally or physically to take any of it, and of course he did everything. Brian was one of those people that did everything to excess.
Yet beneath the celestial dust of stardom, a sinister shadow lurked, an insatiable thirst that gnawed at his core, relentlessly seeking solace within the amber embrace of alcohol.
I was telling Brian, you're only 24 years old, you're not going to start now, It's ridiculous. You should just drink a little bit less,
His liaison with the bottle commenced inconspicuously. A casual toast, evolving into an evening companion, then a morning crutch. The pressures of notoriety, the tornado of relentless tours, and the internal discord within the band momentarily found refuge in the depths of a glass. Whiskey, scotch, anything with a bite.
Because he was drinking from the morning to the last minute in the night, he was drinking Scotch Coke. Coke Scotch. All day, all night, all the time,
It dulled anxieties, stoked the flames of creativity, and cast the world in a beguiling, hazy hue.
He was never drunk, because with the speed, it didn't make him drunk, but he was really doing every stupid things you can imagine.
As the Stones ascended to the pinnacle of rock's pantheon, Brian's descent into alcoholism accelerated, a widening chasm between him and the band.
Oh, everybody went through their star trip, and I think Brian was the only one that it changed in a really deep way, and probably not for the better. It was very difficult for him, and not made any easier probably by the rest of us, because nobody had the time to look after somebody else. If one of them isn't quite strong enough to deal with that situation, there's very little you can do to help him.
The Stones' meteoric success was nothing short of extraordinary. However, at the very pinnacle when Brian could have reveled in the triumph of the band he had birthed, he found himself ensnared in a tumultuous conflict, a quagmire of problems meticulously crafted by his own hands.
Just the four of us, Bass, drum, guitar. And you're playing all them songs that need more than one guitar, and you've only got one guitar. So I had to double up on the bass playing and help Keith out, and Keith had to play a bit more than he would normally play, playing partly rhythm, partly lead. It was tough,
Friends and lovers observed with mounting alarm, their pleas and interventions drowned in the thunderous roar of the bottle. The music underwent a transformation as well.
So he was very unreliable at times in the later period of his life. The last maybe the 3 years. Brian used to get very paranoid about being made fun of.
He faced inner struggles, particularly battling with issues like drug addiction and self-destructive behavior. Jones initiated his journey into drug use during the early 1960s, a period marked by widespread experimentation with mind-altering substances in the music world. Quickly, he developed a significant reliance on various drugs encompassing marijuana, amphetamines, and heroin.
He was the one who asked to do the music for the film. A couple of months later, when I came to London to actually do the recording, I found out that he hadn't prepared anything. He was not in his proper mind anymore. He was experimenting with anything. So, ultimately something came together, but it's nothing memorable. I think the drugs destroyed his already failing discipline, and you can't be an artist without discipline. He probably knew that this could only lead ultimately to self-destruction.
But within a very short amount of time, another guy was coming out, a Mimi, starter, and somebody you didn't suspect lurked in there, and this guy got bigger and bigger as the years went by, and also became more self-destructive. I'm one to talk about that, right? But I'm still here.
I always felt very sorry for Brian. He was two things. He was not very nice, and he upset people very easily. He wasn't very pleasant,
Fame doesn't sit very comfortably on anyone's shoulders. But some people's shoulders doesn't seem to sit on at all, and he was one of them, and I don't think it suited him.
The impact of his addiction extended deeply into his personal and professional life. The repercussions of Jones's drug use manifested in missed recording sessions, unpredictable behavior on stage, and legal entanglements. Multiple arrests for drug possession and his growing unpredictability distanced him from his bandmates.
The whole infamous Stones drug bust all followed in the wake of News of the World stories that prided themselves on actually busting Mick Jagger and proclaiming him a drug user. The problem was, it wasn't Mick, it was Brian.
The only person who was really out of it on drugs was Brian. This was like the last straw that broke the camel's back with Brian. And I think it brought up a lot of bad feelings that were already there about Brian. Mick didn't know he'd end up in prison.
I was at Robert Fraser's Mount Street apartment, and he knocked like a ping pong ball everything as he crossed the room. He sort of bounced away. He was in a horrid state. He came to see me at Paul McCartney's. He was again in a horrid state, and he was convinced Mick and Keith were picking on him and so on and so forth.
Those disputing the underrated argument claim that Jones's creative influence diminished as the Rolling Stones evolved. Jagger and Richards emerged as the primary creative forces, leading to Jones taking a secondary role before his departure. Critics argue that Brian Jones's exit from the Rolling Stones wasn't the catastrophe some make it out to be. Jones had his share of legal and substance issues, adding tension to the group. His unpredictable behavior and lessening musical input eventually led to him leaving the Rolling Stones.
You certainly didn't know if he was going to turn up and what state he was going to be, and then what was he going to be able to do in that state? What job could you give him? Keith and I took drugs, but Brian took too many drugs of the wrong kind, and he wasn't functioning as a musician. I don't think he was that interested in contributing to the Rolling Stones anymore.
In 1969, Jones faced the heartbreaking decision to part ways with the Rolling Stones, a moment that left him shattered. Seeking solace, he withdrew to his Sussex estate, Cochford Farm. Unfortunately, this seclusion seemed to amplify his challenges. His drug dependency escalated, and he found himself sinking into deeper states of depression and paranoia.
It was a very, very difficult decision to make. This is someone that you spent the beginning of the band with, and it was horrible.
It was very important to us, the fact that we were going to go back out on the road behind a new record, that we resolved this thing with Brian. So Mick and I had to go down and sort of tell Brian, virtually like, hey, cock, you're fired. Yeah, the fact that he was expecting it made it kind of easier, I guess. He wasn't surprised, and I didn't really even think he took it all in. He was already up in the stratosphere, It was kind of like, hey.
the tragic narrative surrounding Jones, his struggles with addiction, and eventual departure from the band undoubtedly contributes to the romanticized perception of his significance. The what-if factor is significant, but attributing the band's later successes solely to his absence is simply inaccurate. The myth of a marginalized visionary often overlooks the reality of interpersonal dynamics. Jones's erratic behavior and unreliability played a role in his diminishing position within the band. It wasn't just a matter of suppressing artistic expression. It was a necessity for the band to have stability and cohesion to thrive. The Stones, guided by Jagger and Richards, transformed into a powerhouse, producing some of their most iconic albums after Jones's departure. Some even claim that the band hit its creative peak after Jones left, pointing to killer albums like Sticky Fingers and Exile on Main Street. Considering both perspectives reveals Brian Jones as a complex figure in rock and roll history. While his early contributions to the Rolling Stones are undeniable, questions arise about the sustainability of his impact due to personal struggles and departure. Ultimately, whether Brian Jones is deemed underrated or overrated remains a matter of personal interpretation. What remains indisputable is the enduring legacy he forged as a groundbreaking musician and cultural icon. His influence echoes through the music industry, attesting to his profound impact on rock and roll. Deciding if Brian Jones is underrated or overrated is totally up to your own take. No denying he played a huge part in the Rolling Stones' early success, bringing in cool instruments and shaking up the rock scene. But the personal and professional struggles he faced later on throw some shade on his legacy with the band. The debate around Brian Jones shows just how tricky it is to figure out a musician's impact, especially in a legendary band like the Rolling Stones. No matter where you stand on the Brian Jones scale, one thing's for sure. He left his mark on the rock and roll journey, giving fans and critics plenty to ponder about his true spot in the musical history books. Thanks for tuning in and hanging out with us. Don't miss the next episode. Until then, keep it rolling.
He don't know if it's right or wrong. Maybe he should tell someone. He's not sure just what it was, or if it's against the law. Something